Today I want to speak on the nature of living faith, that it is fruity faith. Living faith is the faith that brings life, the faith that, like a living apple tree, bears many apples, bears much fruit, fruity faith. Living faith is how God first adopts us as his own, and then how he continues to sustain us to the very end. So you may hear this and think, well, it's about faith. Is this just for people starting their journey with the Lord? By no means. This is a message for everyone. We can always grow in faith. It's a message for all, whether you've never followed Jesus before or whether you've followed him for many decades. I believe I need to hear this more than probably all of you watching, because I am so staggered by my lack of faith. Just like a home never stops needing its foundation, we can never outgrow faith. It is the foundation for everything. So, first of all, I want to set a clear line in the sand. God saves us and keeps us by faith alone. By this I mean that he rescues us from sin, brings us into beautiful relationship with himself by faith and faith alone. We can never earn God's acceptance, not even by our best deeds. At the end of our lives, we will stand before God accepted on the basis of whether we trust in him, our relationship, not on the basis of whether we've done more good deeds than bad. This is faith, not karma. Thanks be to God for this security. Contrary to popular belief, God doesn't let people into heaven because of their goodness, because none of us can ever be good enough. No, he brings us into everlasting life with him solely on the basis of our relationship with him, which is entered into by faith alone, by trusting in him as a branch in the vine. Faith is the one and only power cable connecting us to life. It needs no backup cable, no accessory cable. It is the one and only. This is the direct conclusion from another passage about faith, Ephesians 2:8-9. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not as a result of works, so that no one may boast. Here is a statement clear as day that our acceptance with God is not based on us fulfilling a checklist of works. No, for this would be impossible, and also terribly insecure as a foundation. How would we ever know if we've done enough? It says not as a result of works, but through faith. Through faith. Faith is the channel, the pipeline of the grace of God, which saves us from darkness and connects us to Jesus' life. Why do I say all this? Because I believe a common misunderstanding of this passage in James is that we have to bolt on a list of good works to our faith to ultimately be accepted by God, as though trusting in God alone is not enough. But I am convinced that this is not what this passage is intended to teach. Instead, I believe it is a statement on the nature of the living faith, the real trust in God that saves, as opposed to a dead, a nominal, a token faith. So James insists that there is a kind of faith that is not real. It's hypocritical, false, pretending to be something we're not. It's a faith that maybe believes facts about God but doesn't actually trust him. James implies that God is not primarily concerned with whether we have perfect theology, but instead he's interested in relationship, whether our trust in him is real and alive. How do you know if your faith is alive? Even if it's weak, even if it's small, how do you know if it's alive? In the same way that you know if a tree is alive, does it produce fruit, or is it simply a load of dead wood? James's main point is that living faith always inevitably produces good fruit. Or to put it another way, living faith is fruity faith. Notice the order here. The faith comes first, then the fruit, not the other way round. The good tree, of course, comes before the good fruit. The good deeds that James speaks of are a result of living faith, as fruit is the result of a living tree, not the other way round. To help us out, James uses a number of illustrations here. He uses the idea of water from a spring. Living faith is like a freshwater spring. It provides all the water you need. But dead faith is like a saltwater spring. Looks the same, but cannot quench any thirst. The nature of the spring is what determines whether it is good or bad. The spring is shown to be good by tasting the water that flows out of it. He also says, my brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? The nature of the tree is determined and seen by the fruit. A fig tree by nature produces figs. A grapevine by nature produces grapes. In the same way, true faith leads to good fruit, but dead faith only leads to the fruit of disappointment. So he compares dead faith as speaking as though you are concerned about someone in need, wishing them well, saying, I hope you're going to be okay, but you're not actually doing anything to help them. Thankfully, God never treats us like this. He always means everything he says. He always backs up his words with what he does. But when we say that we believe something about God, and it has literally no effect on how we live, do we really believe it? I've heard this called practical atheism. I know I have done it so much. It's like having an intellectual belief in God, but behaving and acting like as though God doesn't exist at all. This is a big problem for me, as I was saying. But living faith believes something and acts as though it believes it. So we see here a central point. Faith is not just an intellectual belief in God, as James shockingly compares this to the beliefs of demons, who are perfectly orthodox, theologically sound, maybe more than us, I don't know, and yet hate what they hear. But how is this true and living faith different to the beliefs of demons? A simple word: trust. Living faith is trusting in the trustworthy one. You don't need loads of trust to be accepted by God. Jesus can come in the door of trust. He can come into the door of faith, even if it is opened just a crack. Just the tiniest mustard seed of faith is enough to begin the relationship. It's not the end goal. More faith, he wants it to grow, to lead us into a closer relationship with God, to lead us into more joy. But he is the perfect gardener. He knows how to grow trust over time, even from tiny beginnings. In the same way, we grow in faith all our lives as Christians, until one day faith turns to sight and we see our well-beloved Lord face to face. I find an extremely powerful illustration of this the tightroper walker Blondin, who would fulfill incredible stunts, walking unprotected over the Niagara Falls. People would faint in anticipation of whether he would make it, but he never fell into the Niagara Falls. He became more and more daring. One time he brought a wheelbarrow, and according to some accounts, he asked if anyone believed he could make it across the tightrope with his wheelbarrow. Everyone cheered, yeah! Then he asked if anyone would get into the wheelbarrow to be pushed across, and no one came forward. And this is a dramatic illustration of trust. Trust means to go out on a venture where the success is absolutely out of your control because it is completely relying on another. The Hebrew verb to trust, batak, also forms the basis for the words to rely and security. Trust means to rely on another. Reliance itself means complete dependence. The word rely comes from the Latin ligare, from which we get the word ligament. It has the sense of connection. To rely means you're connected to another, so that if they fail, you fail. If they fall, you fall. If you're dangling off a rescue helicopter with someone else holding the rope, you're relying completely on them to hold you. You are connected. If they fail to hold the rope, you fail. You fall. You are completely dependent on them. Trust is like a parachute. If you jump out of a plane, your only chance of safety is your parachute. If the parachute fails, you have no other hope of survival. Yet people still jump out of planes, including Bishop Richard, it seems, because they are willing to completely trust that their parachute will open and bring them down to safety. As I stand on this floor, I trust in it. Because I trust the floor won't cave in and me go into the basement, my behaviour is radically affected. I even go into rooms high up in buildings, trusting that the floor will not cave in. If I had doubt, believe me, I would not go up there. I am terrified of heights. But the floor is enough to convince me I can trust it, even with my life. As I said before, this is a message for all Christians. I am massively speaking to myself, because my faith is just a tiny seed still. God has grown it a bit, maybe to the size of a pumpkin seed, say, but I long for it to grow even more. How can I trust the floor with my life more than I trust God? The fact that true faith, living trust in God, necessarily leads to good fruit may initially sound scary, but if you really think about it, this is really good news. Why? Because trust is the foundation for true love, love that changes us forever. I long to change. I long for a more loving heart to God, a more loving heart to other people. I long for more compassion, more patience, more self-control. But how do I change? Not primarily by obsessive behaviour management, but by faith and by love. If living faith necessarily leads to good fruit, to the good fruit of loving God more, and thus necessarily leads to life change, this means that God is giving us the ultimate means to grow as human beings. No matter how much we have failed, by asking the Lord to change our hearts and truly leaning on Him, trusting in Him, relying on Him, He can do miracles in us. We all know from experience that trust is the foundation for love. Can we love someone as deeply if we don't trust them? As I mentioned before, the Hebrew for trust also forms the root for reliance and security. If we trust in God, we know that we can rely on Him. We know He gives us security, and security is the perfect greenhouse for unforced love to grow. It means we don't trust in ourselves, for I only disappoint myself, but we trust in God alone, who never disappoints. We don't trust in our good deeds, because then when we fail, we will think that God has abandoned us because we failed. No, we trust in God alone, in His promises. We let Him sort out the good fruit as a result. Good fruit comes from a place of secure love for God, security of a secure greenhouse. It doesn't come out of an incessant worry about whether we're doing enough to jump over the hoops to be accepted by Him. God invites us not to believe dry doctrine, but to trust Him as a person, to find all our security in Him, in a way that will bear all sorts of beautiful fruit in our lives. What better news could there be than this? And what relationship could be more wonderful than one we can trust entirely, with a trust that is so deep it affects everything we do, enabling us to have a love for God that consumes our being entirely. Dear Lord, please increase our trust for You and build on this trust wonderful love and all sorts of good fruit. Help us to trust You alone and make us fruitful trees. Bear good fruit through us as branches of Your vine. Thank You for this wonderful invitation that You would bear fruit through us, and that we can trust You and find utter security simply by trusting in You alone. In Jesus' name, Amen.